what you're looking at here is just a photo like you will see on your lab quiz. All right, I'm going to say that again. This is a photo just like you would see in a lab quiz. And I want you to notice something. This is a two-dimensional image, right? Obviously, that you're seeing on your screen right now. This poses a problem in lab. You cannot take this model and rotate it around to look at the other side. You can't spin it. You can't touch it. You can't turn it like maybe you did with some bones in the first semester. But you still have to tell me for every blood vessel that I choose. Let's say I chose this one right here. This would be perfectly good for a lab quiz. And with the number of versions of each question, guess what? Somebody's going to have this as a question on quiz number 2. The question would be, name the blood vessel. To get full credit, you would have to start with, is it right or left? Which one is it? Is this the right or left blood vessel? Then there's going to be a name. What is the blood vessel? And then there's going to be artery or vein at the end of it. Now, this vessel that we are looking at right here happens to be the brachiocephalic vein. That's what we're looking at right here. Now, I'm not trying to teach you this thing right now because you've got a whole lab where I'll teach you some of these. This is the brachiocephalic vein. If this is one of the answers, just these two words, brachiocephalic vein, and you choose it, 0 credit for you. Why? Because you didn't start with the word right or left. On a pen and paper quiz, you could get half credit if you left that out. Or for that matter, if you left out the word vein. You might get partial credit if you had a generous lab instructor. In an online quiz where you're selecting the answer, no partial credit. If you picked the answer that's these two words, and trust me, with a lot of these, this will appear, brachiocephalic vein. Yes, that is a brachiocephalic vein, but you still get 0 credit for choosing this because you didn't tell me, is it the right or the left brachiocephalic vein? Because I got 2 of them. One of them is right here with the dot on it. The other one is right there. I have 2. This is a paired set of veins. Now, how do I determine? Well, here's what you need to do in a two-dimensional image-based quiz is you have to make an assumption. This figure is facing us in anatomical position, everyone. This is a photo straight on in anatomical position for this model. That makes everything over here the right side as this model faces us, everything over here the left side. Which brachiocephalic vein is this one? It's the left brachiocephalic vein. That gives you full credit. And again, for a multiple choice quiz, this gives you credit. Any other answer gives you a 0, and you don't want to get the 0. So for almost every photograph you see, it is facing you in anatomical position, and you must answer according to the model's right and left, not yours. Nobody cares about yours. It's always the patient's right or left. So this is kind of a big deal, and you have to be prepared for this. So the photos you see, There has to be something that will tell me. In this particular photo, I can see the heart, I can see the apex, which we know skews a little to the left. That would tell me, if my general assumption did not. Let's look at a different photograph. Here's a close-up photo of one of our lab torsos. Again, I can see some things that help me out a little bit here. I can see the diaphragm right there. I know I'm looking at the chest. I can see the aortic arch coming up and doing this. So I know, again, this model is facing me. So these blood vessels right here, let's say this blue one or this red one, both of which are fair game for your quiz. Which side of the model are they on? It's left side. So these would be left blood vessels. One more model. Here's one, a very nice vascular model that we have. In order to see certain blood vessels, the model has to be flipped around. So I want you to look at this photo, noticing the sacrum, the ischium bone right there. I can tell this is the posterior knee because there's no patella there. And if I look at the entire photo, what do I see down here but the heel bone, the calcaneus? So I know this is a posterior view. This one is a posterior view. So these red blood vessels that you see here, here, if this is a posterior view, what would all of these be? Those are the rights. These are the lefts. There has to be something that tells me which view is it that I'm looking at. There will be some anatomical clues. You'll have to notice them. It will get easier as you go through the blood vessels. Trust me. And there's a few, not many, where the only way to see them is from this posterior view. So during the lab instruction part, I make a big point of telling you this is only seen from behind, or this is a posterior view. So there will be something that you have to pick up on. If you've got no clue at all, is it anterior, posterior? Guess a straight anterior anatomical position view, because 9 times out of 10, that's what it's going to be. In fact, 90 times out of 100 or 95 times out of 100, that's what it's going to be. There are a few where it's not, so you need to look for those anatomical landmarks that will tell me, am I looking at this from the front or the back? You need to look for those things that let me know, is this a right or a left? So pay particular attention to that as I take you through these blood vessels. It's a challenge with a 2-dimensional image. Now, wouldn't it be nice if I could create 3-dimensional images of all these lab models and then send everybody, some 3D glasses that you have at home? That would be very cool. Maybe for the next time I create a whole bunch of anatomy labs online, I'll try that. Heck, by that time, you'll probably have a hologram at your house and it'll just project and you won't have any problems. You can walk around the thing. But for this semester, we're kind of stuck. So always assume anatomical position facing you off the screen unless you see something that tells you otherwise.
Hey everyone, we're back in the A&P lab. We have quite a lot of ventilation noise today. I'm in favor of good ventilation, but it does make some audio problems, so I'm hoping that the trusty old mic will pick me up just fine for this little portion of lab number 2. So lab number 2, also a cardiovascular lab, this one all about blood vessels. It begins with a little bit of information about the microscopic structure of an artery versus a vein, and then it dives right into a whole bunch of blood vessels. Now, I am definitely of the opinion that drawing it to know it is a good methodology for your study. So don't just do what I do what I do plus, do what I do more, do what I do extra. So I'm always in favor of drawing something first, then looking at the slide or the model. So in this lab, I'll demonstrate that for you before we take a look at the actual structures using a real microscope slide. So get the colored pencils, get the crayons, get the clicky 4-colored pen, whatever fancy arrangement you have, get it ready to draw a picture of an artery and a vein in cross-section. As you see in your lab manual, there is a reference to a set of pages, 722 or something like that, in your textbook. The blood vessel chapter of whatever textbook you have is what you want to look at and focus on those structures in lab number 2 that are boldface for an artery or a vein. Now, I spend all this money, of course, buying the fancy colored markers, so let's use those. When we're talking about a blood vessel, and I'll use different colors here, why not? Because I have them. We, of course, would have a layer that would be closest to where the blood is. This layer, nice, slick, smooth, simple squamous epithelium called the tunica for coat, intima, or tunica interna. You see it listed as tunica intima in your lab manual, so let's go with that one. So this is the layer of tissue that will be right next to where the blood is. Then, in an artery, what I'm drawing here, we would next have the tunica media, which is a big, big, thick layer in an artery of smooth muscle fibers. The tunica media, sometimes called the tunica muscularis. Then, last but not least, since I can color code, out here we would have some amount of connective tissue and you'll learn about this in your lectures, called the tunica adventitia, or externa. Again, you go with the terms listed in your lab manual, and that's adventitia. So this would basically be the structure in cross-section microscopically of a human artery. Tunica intima in blue, media in pink, adventitia in green. Arteries tend to have thick walls. They're nice and round. Veins will have the same 3 layers, but a much thinner wall typically you would see in a vein. Sometimes they appear as round like this. Oftentimes they appear a little more, let's say, deflated looking, generally with a much wider opening for the blood. You can talk about the differences in velocity and pressure in your lectures. It's very exciting stuff, trust me. But the same 3 layers, so I have the intima here in blue, a much thinner media in pink, and of course an adventitia out here So the one on your left, this is a vein, and right here is the corresponding artery right next door, like that. But this isn't all the structures that you're responsible for in today's lab. You have the same three layers: intima, media, adventitia, intima, media, adventitia, but look specifically in the artery for some extra structures. Two elastic membranes or elastic laminas, and what we call the vasa vasorum. Let me show you those. Arteries in their wall have a lot more elastic tissue than do corresponding veins. In fact, they have a lot more tissue in their wall than do corresponding veins. But the first thing you want to look for is right here at the boundary between the intima and the media. Let me draw it in here with a black marker. Right about where all those smooth muscle fibers start, you will see what looks to me like one of those pieces of ribbon candy some people have that wraps back and forth like that. You'll see a layer of this, which is called the internal elastic lamina. You see that highlighted right here on page 1 of your lab manual. And farther out, starting into the adventitia, you may or may not see another one of these, depending on the staining of the slide. That's the external elastic lamina. Look for these in the wall of the artery. The other thing that you want to look for, and I'll use this purple marker for this, is structures called the vasa vasorum, which translates from Latin into English as the vessel of the vessels. Not to put too fine a point on it, but aren't these things out here cells? Smooth muscle cells, connective tissue cells, fibroblasts making elastin, and so on. Don't they need the same stuff other cells do? A little bit of glucose, some oxygen, get rid of their CO2, etc. So these larger blood vessels have smaller blood vessels that serve them. So look, typically I think it's easiest to find it in an artery. Out here in the adventitia, you might see a small blood vessel, small verge of an artery or a vein that's out here. These would be the vasa vasorum, vessels of the vessel. A way to think about this that I always tell people to use, let's see how my artwork is. Maybe if you watch one of those Shark Week programs. So here's my shark. And have you ever seen in all these videos that the Discovery Channel loves to make of sharks, that some species of shark have a symbiotic relationship with these smaller little fish that live with the shark, swim in and out and clean his gills, things like that. So these are the fishorum, the fish of the fish. These are the blood vessels of the blood vessel. So watch for those in the micrograph. I will show those to you if we come across them. Here we have a micrograph, actual microscope slide that I have focused on right here, showing us an artery and a vein, corresponding artery-vein pair. I hope you can tell which is which. The artery right here, nice and round, very thick-walled, most of which is the tunica media, and the vein right here, much larger diameter opening, much thinner wall. So I hope you can tell the artery from the vein here. Even on this low magnification, this is just scanning power, I can even see the hint of the internal elastic membrane right there. So let me look at this, let's say the artery in slightly greater magnification. So here's that very same artery at higher magnification. This is where the blood would be. Notice I can see a few blood cells right there, believe it or not. So right here where my meter stick is, this is the tunica intima. This sea of smooth muscle fibers you see here, the tunica media. And look closely, do you see this wavy line? Right here where my finger is, this is the internal elastic lamina. It's the wavy line. I don't see a particularly good external lamina, which would be out here, but no slide is perfect. But I can definitely see the three layers: tunica intima, tunica media, tunica adventitia out here. Let's look at the vein. Right above. Same three layers touching the blood, the tunica intima. Notice the much thinner tunica media here. And this is all the tunica adventitia, connective tissue outside the vessel. And it even breaks loose into a little bit of adipose there, holding this blood vessel in place. Same three layers in a vein. And again, a perfectly good slide right here for you to tell the difference between these two blood vessels in their cross-sectional appearance. Artery, vein. Very nice examples right here. Okay, what you're looking at here is another fairly nice corresponding artery-vein pair, but I was a little mean with this one because I found two that are both essentially round. I mean, certainly I can see a rather oblong vein right here, but these two are the corresponding pair, artery and vein. Which one's which? How would you know when they both look round? Well, you look for the thickness of the wall, of course. The much thinner walled vein right here, the much thicker walled artery right here, and even at this magnification you can see a hint of that internal elastic membrane or internal elastic lamina and the external out here. Notice red blood cells in the lumen of each one of these vessels, so the vein much thinner walled. Let's zoom in a little more closely on this artery. Okay, here we are zoomed in on that arterial wall, tunica intima, media, adventitia, right here. Intima, media, adventitia. I'm always given the impression when I see the adventitia that the tissue seems to loosen up out here a little bit, a little less dense. That happens to be loose connective tissue out there, so that does make sense. Notice this ribbon-like structure you see right here, internal elastic lamina. And as I look out here on the other side of the tunica media, I can see a hint of that external elastic lamina there as well. Let me change the fine adjustment a little bit. Maybe you can see it a little more clearly. Internal, follow my meter stick. Elastic lamina, external elastic lamina. Tunica intima, tunica media, tunica adventitia. And notice what I have out here. This is a small blood vessel. I can see another one right here, vasa vasorum. So look for tiny blood vessels out in the adventitia. Again, I tend to think they're a little easier to find in an artery than in a vein, probably because you just have more tissue out there. So I can see small little blood vessels, not these big ones, they're too large for that, but look at these small ones. Here's one right here, one right there. This is vasa vasorum, vessels of the vessel. Let's look at the corresponding vein right here, so much thinner walled. Lots of red blood cells in there, tunica intima, tunica media, tunica adventitia. Intima, media, adventitia. Use your textbook. It's got some good micrographs in it as well. And let me just pan around out here in the adventitia and see if I can find what makes me happy as a little bit of vasa vasorum in this particular slide. I don't know that I see a good example outside my vein here, everyone. There's some adipose tissue, but that's back in 223. We don't need to worry about that. I don't see any I think are quiz worthy here, so let's go back to the artery. I can definitely see some blood vessels and capillaries out here. Here's one right here. I see a few red blood cells in it. Another right there. Vasa vasorum, vessels of the vessel. So again, right here, small blood vessel in the wall of a larger blood vessel, vasa vasorum, vessel of the vessel. So hopefully you see that drawing some of these structures, even as crude as mine, before you actually look at them, can help you learn these structures. Don't be passive and just sit back and watch me do it, because I'm not going to do it in every lab. I'm showing you some methodology in the first few so that hopefully you can take those and run as we proceed through different labs in this semester. So when you're online, you have a particular challenge for learning these structures because you can't get your hands on the slide. You have to do an image search or look at the ones that I provide. Be active, in fact, be proactive. Seek these things out, make some pictures. That will hopefully shorten your study time. Okay, you can see that I have broken out my fancy colored markers and I have drawn what amounts to be a gingerbread torso with a highly stylized Valentine-like heart here on the whiteboard for you. Now, why did I draw this picture? Well, if you grab your handy-dandy lab manual, I'm looking at page 3, this first list of blood vessels that you have to memorize for your next lab quiz. A lot of people struggle with this. You, me, everybody. Totally normal to have problems with this. So what I'm going to try to do is show you a method using our friend here that will hopefully make it a little easier for you to memorize some of these blood vessels. So on page 3, we have the blood vessels of the head, neck, and upper thorax. I've got a whole slew of models in this room that I could use for a quiz or a practical question, torso, neck, and head-wise, as well as the upper and lower limbs. There is no possible way I could make a lab long enough where I walk you through every single model. That's a possibility for your quiz. you'd end up with a lab video here that was 8 hours long. So what we do is first draw out some of these blood vessels to make you independent of which model I might choose for your lab quiz or practical exam. By drawing it first, it makes what model is selected less important. I'm not going to draw every single blood vessel for every single part listed in Lab 2. I'm trying to show you a method. You have excellent drawings of these blood vessels in your textbook. Use them. Look at them. Make your own pictures. Don't just sit back and say, oh, I'll watch Dwayne draw them all. No, that's not going to work. You have to make some of these yourself. I'm just trying to show you a method. So I'll do it with a couple body regions, and then your job as the student, homework-wise, will be to create some of these for arteries and veins that you will use. So join me on page 3. I've got all my colors ready, and you can watch how I do this. So here we are in a person's thorax, and I will do a little videography here and try to zoom in a little bit so you can see a little more clearly what it is that I'm doing. So right here we see a little better close-up view of this highly artistic picture that I have created for you. And I've got my red marker ready. So we're on the left side of page 3, way down at the bottom. I want you to look at the ascending aorta. As you recall from lab number 1, and if you don't recall, go back and look at lab number 1, the aorta comes out of the left ventricle like this. Makes a great big U-turn, dips behind the heart, then works its way down the torso. The ascending aorta is this section of the aorta that goes up. So right here, say from here to here, the start of the aortic arch, that's the ascending aorta. Right there. So the ascending aorta coming out, shooting upward before the aortic arch, which we see right here. Then the aorta makes its U-turn downward, and this whole thing becomes the descending aorta. The whole run of the aorta that goes downward in your body is called the descending aorta, which has a thoracic section and an abdominal section. That I think you can see right there. So the thoracic aorta is the part of the aorta that descends above your diaphragm. Abdominal aorta descends below your diaphragm. So on page 3, you have to know the ascending aorta just before the aortic arch. The aortic arch has branches, 3 of them coming off in the upper thorax. 1, 2, and 3. Now, you're not supposed to just know this. This is what you use your textbook for. 3 branches coming off the aortic arch that you have to know the names of. On the left side, because my picture is facing you, I have the left subclavian artery. I also have the left common carotid artery. These two blood vessels are coming off the left side of the aortic arch. Let me adjust a little bit so you can see it. The left subclavian artery, left common carotid artery. Here we have a great big arterial offshoot of the aortic arch on the right side, which is your brachiocephalic artery. Brachiocephalic artery. You only have one of these. This is a rare place in human arterial anatomy where you are asymmetrical. The aorta comes out and makes a great big honking U-turn over here on the left side and has these two smaller branches coming off. We need to, in blood speak, shunt some blood back over here to the person's right. So we have what's called a brachiocephalic artery, great big one, that goes this way toward your right shoulder. Brachio, arm, cephalic, head. And then this thing splits into two blood vessels we see right here called the right common carotid artery and right subclavian artery. Arteries of the upper thorax. Again, ascending aorta right here. The aortic arch, which has three branches shooting off from it. The left subclavian artery, left common carotid, going straight up your neck. Maybe take a pulse on that thing. And the right common carotid and right subclavian are coming off this thing, the brachiocephalic artery, of which you only have one. Notice these blood vessels are listed here on page 3 in your lab manual. But we're not done yet, because these two common carotid arteries branch, and you have to know the names of some of these blood vessels. So let's draw those out. So here I've just moved next door into somebody's neck, but I like to label everything. As always, this person facing us in anatomical position. So here I have the left common carotid artery. Its partner over here, the right common carotid artery. And then these things begin to branch. So make sure that you use your textbook as a help here to name the branches of these arteries as we go up the neck. So the common carotids will branch into external and internal carotid arteries. So here, let's just look at the left side. I would have the left external carotid artery and the left internal carotid artery, right external carotid artery, right internal carotid artery. The two internals proceed up into your skull to form what we call the circle of Willis, or the cerebral arterial circle sometimes. We'll see that by itself in just a moment. But let's look at the branches coming off of the external carotid artery in order. Always important for us to try to get these in order on a diagram. So first, you will see an arterial branch coming off of this thing actually go down, called the superior thyroid artery. It goes down to your thyroid gland. The superior thyroid artery. The next branch we have coming off the external carotid, which actually goes up under your jaw, this is called the facial artery. The facial artery. Continuing my way up, I would then have the maxillary artery. Still going up, now getting into your head. This one going to the maxilla, this one going to your face, this one coming down to your thyroid gland. Still going up, serving the outside of the skull and your face. Then I have the occipital artery, named for your occipital bone, of course. The occipital artery, still going up. Then I have one that's very difficult to find on many of our models, but I'll show it to you. A blood vessel called the posterior auricular artery, running out of space to right here, but I think that's okay. Let me make sure you can see it. There we go. And after this posterior auricular branches off, the external carotid artery becomes the superficial temporal artery. And this would be mirrored on the other side. So all of these are lefts. And I know what you're saying right now. You're saying, Dwayne, how in the heck am I supposed to keep those straight? Draw them first, like this. Or maybe draw them second, after you see me go through the model. But learn the order in which these blood vessels shoot off of their main road here. And I think that will make it a little easier for you as we look at the models. Hopefully. So here we're looking at one of my lab models, a torso, that shows me some of these blood vessels. Again, I'm still in the blood vessels of the head, neck, and upper thorax. Now, keep in mind, not every model will show every vessel. But any model that shows up here in the instructional section of the video or in the practice session is totally fair game for your quiz or your practical. If it does not show up here where I walk you through or in the practice section of the online lab, I can't use that model. So looking at this torso, of course, I can see the heart, I can see this person's chin, so I know that this person is facing me in an anatomical position, with this being the right and this being the left sides. So that tells me a lot about some of these vessels that I'm looking at. I can see the aorta coming out of the heart right here, so this would be the ascending aorta, right here. And I can see 1, 2, 3 branches coming off of that aorta. Let me zoom in a little bit, and you can see them too. 1, 2, 3 branches coming straight off the top of the aortic arch. The first one right here is the left subclavian artery. I can see it coming up and going toward the arm. This is the left common carotid artery, which continues up into the neck. And this is the one and only, we're asymmetrical, brachiocephalic artery right here, before it branches into the right common carotid and right subclavian that I can see here. Let me zoom out a little bit so I can see this person's thyroid gland, and I can, just as long as we're here, notice a superior thyroid artery coming down into it. Superior thyroid artery, this red blood vessel, which is an offshoot of the external carotid artery here on the left side. But what we want to focus our attention on are the great big red ones in the neck. The left common carotid right here, right common carotid right there, and right subclavian I can see extending here. So that brachiocephalic artery from here to here on this particular model, right common carotid, right subclavian arteries. Remember, 3 branches off of that aortic arch. Just an ever so slightly different view on this particular model. Notice the chin and the nose, left side, right side. You always have to orient yourself first thing when you see one of these models in an online lab quiz. So allow me to turn him just a little, and I can again see the 1, 2, 3 branches coming off the aortic arch. Here's that ascending aorta right here, and I see the left, subclavian artery, left common carotid artery, brachiocephalic artery right here, which very quickly splits into right common carotid, right subclavian, right there. And I'll show this to you on various models in the practice section of the lab. Let me zoom in a little closer so you can see them coming off the aortic arch. The left subclavian artery, left common carotid. Here's the brachiocephalic, which very quickly splits again into the right common carotid and right subclavian. What I'd like to do is follow those carotids as they go up into this person's neck. So here we have what I think is probably the single best cephalic blood vessel model showing us arteries of the neck and the head. You can see by the jaw, of course, the eye sockets, which way this person is looking. So we are looking at a right profile of this particular model. Again, I can't stress enough, always make sure that you orient yourself. And let's talk about what blood vessels we see here on this model. So right here, pulling it out with my finger, we have the right common carotid artery. Imagine putting your fingers here to feel a pulse on a person. This is the right common carotid artery. If he is facing the other way, of course, the left common carotid artery. Very nice that these are paired, but you always have to orient yourself right or left first. And then I want you to look right here where my probe is. This artery splits. There's a major divergence or bifurcation in this particular artery into the external and internal carotid arteries. So this is the right external carotid artery. This is the right internal carotid artery. Now, on a photograph, 2 dimensions, it's kind of tough to tell, isn't it? How would you know for a quiz or a practical? Look at this thing, people. This thing shooting off is the superior thyroid artery. We already drew that one. This is the superior thyroid artery, which is a branch of the external carotid artery. Let me tilt him a little bit so you can see the split. Right here where my probe is. Internal carotid, external carotid. The superior thyroid branches off of the external carotid artery. So the right common carotid artery, right external carotid artery, right internal carotid artery, because we're on the right side of this skull. The left side is simply a mirror image. See that thyroid coming off right there? So I'm grasping the left common carotid. There's the left external and left internal carotid arteries. I can tell because I look for my superior thyroid branching off of the external carotid. I only know that if I draw it first. Next, I'm going to try to zoom in a little more tightly on this external carotid artery. So again, the superior thyroid artery. And look at this second branch coming off right here, which dips under the model's mandible, coming up to the face. This is the facial artery. Notice where his nose would be, nasal bone, teeth. This is the right facial artery that I see right here. It always comes out and makes this little hook under the mandible, so always look for that. Sorry about the squeak. So I have from the external carotid artery, the superior thyroid, facial coming up to the face, and then inside, right up here, there's more branching, isn't there? I can see a branch that comes off right there, everyone, and goes to the maxilla. This is the maxillary artery. Right side, again, look at his mouth, the right maxillary artery. I can see shooting off and going to the occipital bone, the right occipital artery. And as that external carotid continues up and goes outside the skull, actually serving the temporalis muscle that lives right here, this is the right superficial temporal artery. Superficial temporal, occipital. Notice that there's one missing here from our picture. Wasn't there a posterior auricular artery, one that's supposed to go to just rear of your auditory canal? This model, this clear plastic skull, does not have one of those. So I can't use him to ask that. This model has a great common carotid. External, internal carotids, thumbs up. Superior thyroid, facial, great. Even maxillary in there. Superficial temporal and occipital arteries, all rights here, but no posterior auricular artery. The only model I have that shows that well is this one. The ear hole, your external auditory meatus, if you prefer. And notice this artery that comes out right behind it, right posterior to it. This is the posterior auricular artery. This is the superficial temporal artery. And this one back here is the occipital artery, occipital bone. So pretend this is a quiz or a practical. And I have a dot right here on this artery. And I say, name the blood vessel. What do you say? If you just said posterior auricular artery, you missed the question because it's the left posterior auricular artery. You have one on each side of your head, so you have to tell me which one it is. Left posterior auricular artery, left superficial temporal artery, and left occipital artery right there. These are all offshoots or branches of the left external carotid artery, which doesn't show that well on this model, but shows very well on this one. So in the practice section, make sure that you're looking at all the models. If I can show it in the practice, it's fair game for the quiz or the practical. I cannot show you a posterior auricular artery on this model because it doesn't have one. But I can certainly show you superficial temporal or occipital. I think you'll get the hang of it as you go through the practice section. Okay, now let me attempt to show you the same sort of idea with the circle of Willis, or what we call the cerebral arterial circle. A lot of people struggle with this one. This is a picture of your skull, and we're looking down into it. So maybe to help us, this would be the front or the anterior side. This would be the posterior side. This person's looking at the top of the whiteboard. These arteries, which are all branching off that internal carotid pair that shoot into our skull, make a circle and serve a lot of our central nervous system here from this arterial arrangement. So yes, it looks essentially like a circle, but it has branches coming off of the thing. Now, I would use my textbook for this, everyone. Don't just think you can automatically know it. I've drawn this, hundreds of times, so I've had a little bit of practice. But let's draw in some of the blood vessels we would see here. And I'll start right here at the front going toward this person's face. I have a pair of what are called anterior cerebral arteries. Anterior cerebral artery. Over here, the same thing. Now, this is the top of somebody's skull, the way you will see it on the model. They're looking this way. This is their right side. This is their left side. You always have to preface each blood vessel name with right or left when it's a paired blood vessel. So you will need something that will orient you as to which side is which. Always look for that. So I have a right anterior cerebral artery and a left anterior cerebral artery, and connecting those two is the anterior communicating artery. I only have one, the anterior communicating artery. Then you will see pretty quickly after that arterial branches that go laterally or to the sides in this person. These are the middle cerebral arteries, one on each side. Right middle cerebral artery, left middle cerebral artery. Now, if I have an anterior communicating artery, I probably have at least one posterior communicating artery, and I actually have two. Right here, before this third split that you also must know the name of. Left anterior cerebral artery, left middle cerebral artery, left what? Posterior cerebral artery. Right there. And what connects them? The posterior communicating artery right here. Now, everybody watch very closely in my mess of a picture, and you have to be able to draw at least this well, everyone. Left anterior cerebral artery, left middle cerebral artery, left posterior communicating, because there's two, left posterior cerebral artery. This would be the right posterior cerebral artery. Then I have a rather large offshoot right here called the basilar artery. I only have one of those, which then divides into two vertebral arteries serving your vertebrae. So everybody watch one time with me for this circle of Willis. Yes, I know, like Bruce Willis. So if you watch the Die Hard movie, I'll just say, yeah, come out to the college. We'll have a few laughs. We'll learn all these blood vessels for the movie buffs. But let's go through them one time relatively fast. Right and left anterior cerebral arteries. The one and only anterior communicating artery. Right and left middle cerebral arteries. Left and right posterior communicating arteries. Left and right posterior cerebral arteries. The one and only basilar artery. And right and left vertebral arteries. It will hopefully save you a lot of time to draw the picture first. Then look at the section of this online lab where I take you through the model. But remember, there's no possible way I could show you every conceivable model. So if you draw the picture, then you're a little more independent of which model I use. That's a good thing. I will make this promise to you. I will only use on your quiz and your practical a model that I show you either in the instructional or the practice part of the video. If the model is not in the instructional section or in the practice section, I won't use it. If it can be found in either one, completely fair game. That's the rule I laid out for you at the beginning of the semester, and that's the rule we will follow for this and all of our labs. Now let's look at the circle of Willis. Notice the face on my model, the clear plastic skull, and I'm going to take off the top of his cranium. And we can see right down into the skull, the brain has been removed, and we're only looking at the blood vessels here, and we're not even looking at all of them. Now let me try to help you orient yourself if this was to come up on a quiz or a practical. These two very narrow arteries that you see here are the anterior cerebral arteries. So that means this is the anterior side. This thing back here is the basilar artery, which is on the posterior side. So I know that this person is looking that way, looking away from me. That makes this the right side, this the left side. You always want to orient yourself with these models before you answer any questions. So notice the skull, anterior, posterior, basilar artery is in the back. These two thin ones are the anterior cerebrals, of course, on the anterior side. So just going through and naming them pretty fast. The two anterior cerebral arteries, right and left. Connecting them is the anterior communicating artery, of which you only have one. The right middle cerebral artery, the left middle cerebral artery. Right and left middle cerebral arteries. Connecting the middle cerebral and the posterior cerebral is the posterior communicating. Right here. Posterior communicating artery. The right one. Posterior communicating artery. The left one. Right posterior cerebral artery. Left posterior cerebral artery. Anterior, middle, posterior cerebral arteries. Anterior communicating, posterior communicating, right one, posterior communicating, left one. Coming straight down here is the single basilar artery, which then branches into right and left vertebral arteries. The circle of Willis or the cerebral arterial circle. Again, look for this view right here, the two anterior cerebrals with the anterior communicating between them to orient the front of the skull. Then I know everything over here is right, everything over here is left. Take your time, be careful when you do that. The circle of Willis. And now for some veins of the head, neck, and upper thorax. Let's begin with the same clear plastic skull we used before to describe or at least show some of the cranial sinuses. Now, I'm going to take you all the way back to last semester, which I know is almost painful, but join me there anyway. In your first semester class, when you talked about the formation of cerebrospinal fluid, which formed in the choroid plexuses of your brain and leaked out from those very leaky capillaries, circulated around, not pulsing, doesn't pulse like blood in arteries, but it did move, eventually re-entering the cardiovascular system or the bloodstream in these sinuses that had subarachnoid granulations, or arachnoid granulations rather. They even tried to show me a couple of those on this model here and here. Now, the arachnoid granulations and the return of cerebrospinal fluid to the bloodstream isn't here nor there for 224 lab, because remember, this is all anatomical. You're just trying to learn the names of some of these things. But if I can point them out to you, maybe with a little bit of, I don't know, description of their function, maybe that will help you remember them. So this big blue line we see here on this model represents the first of the cranial sinuses that you need to know the name of. This one is the superior sagittal sinus, shown extremely well on this model. Also shown right here on this model. The superior sagittal sinus just under the skull. Sort of under that sagittal suture, you might remember again from 223. Superior sagittal sinus. Here on either side of it, at the back of the skull, we see the right and left transverse sinuses. Right and left transverse sinuses. Sometimes those are called lateral sinuses, but we'll say transverse sinuses. Right and left. Remember, he's looking away from us right now. I'll continue to angle this skull downward, and you can see this sinus right here that lies under the occipital bone. This one is the occipital sinus. Now, superior sagittal sinus and occipital sinus are singular vessels, so we don't have a right and left for those. But we do for the transverse sinus, right and left. And notice that the transverse sinus right over here makes a curve. It actually makes an S-shaped curve. So right where it starts to curve, this is called the sigmoid sinus. This one's on the right side, the right sigmoid sinus. That would make this one over here the left sigmoid sinus. Superior sagittal sinus, right transverse, left transverse, left sigmoid sinus right here with the curve, and occipital sinus right there. There are two other sinuses that you must know this model doesn't show us. They are first, this one right here called the straight sinus, which runs right above the cerebellum. You can only see it in this sagittal section, the straight sinus. The other one, which I don't have many models of, is right here, right above the corpus callosum. This is the inferior sagittal sinus. Superior sagittal sinus right there. Straight sinus right here. And inferior sagittal sinus right there. Only one of those, only one of these, and only one of those. So again, superior sagittal sinus, inferior sagittal sinus, straight sinus. Next up, right in this torso, and almost any model shows these, so pretty easy to find. We can orient ourselves two ways. First, notice the superior vena cava right here, and again, this person's chin. They're staring right at us. So left side, right side. And these are veins. These blue blood vessels carrying blood back toward the heart. And of course, you get to learn all about that in lecture, so I won't bore you with it here. But we can see blood vessels coming from the arm and the head coming back to the heart. So this blood moving in the opposite direction of the arteries that we saw earlier. And what we can see here, this great big blue vessel, is the internal jugular vein. Right and left. The larger vessel that I will see in somebody's neck, blue for veins, is the internal jugular. The external jugular is very thin. Most models don't even bother to show it to us, but I'll let you see it in a couple different models that do show it. So the big one, often the only one we see, internal jugular vein. These two, here and here, are the subclavian veins. Right over here, I'm just removing this old sticker because somebody obviously used this one for a quiz or a practical. I probably will too, for that matter. So we have the right subclavian vein and the left subclavian vein. Now, in terms of veins, we're very symmetrical here. We have two brachiocephalics, whereas on the arterial side, we only had one. So here, right here is the left brachioarm cephalic head vein. Left brachiocephalic vein, right there. Over here, where these two converge or join with one another, I have the right brachiocephalic vein, both of those leading into the superior vena cava that we saw in lab number 1. So again, just quickly, right internal jugular vein, right subclavian vein, right brachiocephalic vein. Left internal jugular vein, left subclavian vein, left brachiocephalic vein. Almost every model is going to show these blood vessels. It's that thin external jugular that we have to spend a little time looking for. So right here we have one of my few torsos that actually shows us an external jugular vein. First, we will orient ourselves by the model's chin and nose facing us anatomical position, which is the most common position you'll see things in. Right and left. Left subclavian vein, left brachiocephalic vein, right brachiocephalic vein, right subclavian. Here's the right internal jugular, which is cut off on this model right there. But let's look at the left side. And I want you to look very closely. Let me zoom in. Right here, this is the external jugular vein. This one is the internal jugular vein. The external jugular vein, very small compared to internal. When people say the jugular vein, they're usually talking about this big honker of an internal jugular vein, not this little bitty external jugular vein. I do have one other model to show this to you on, but as we go over to it, let's just look at this torso right here. Again, this is the very classic view that we see of the two brachiocephalics, great big internal jugular, subclavian. Once you can see the chin and the mouth, you know they're facing us. Right subclavian, left subclavian vein, left internal jugular, right internal jugular, right brachiocephalic, left brachiocephalic, all feeding into that superior vena cava, which will then dump the blood into the right atrium. But of course, you already knew that. The model you're looking at right here is affectionately known as Wireman. I bet you can guess where he got his name. This model is very good for things in and around the torso, but in my humble opinion, as soon as you get out away from the torso, he goes all to crap, because there aren't any anatomical landmarks out in his limbs, bones, etc., for us to use to orient ourselves. But this model does have the distinction of being the one and only model that I'm aware of here at the college on campus that prompted a fist fight between two second semester A&P students. This happened many moons ago over in the B building at this campus. We only had one Wireman model in the lab. Two students both wanted to use it at the same time, and they decided to have a fist fight over this thing. It's not worth having a fist fight over. Some people love Wireman, some people hate Wireman. I would fall a little more into the second camp, not my favorite model, but it does show me a few things here in the torso So notice the apex of the heart, the diaphragm, the liver. This model is in anatomical position right here, facing you. I can see the very large internal jugular vein, the much smaller external jugular vein, the subclavian vein, these are rights, and the right brachiocephalic vein right there. Over here, I can see the left external jugular, left internal jugular, left subclavian, left brachiocephalic. So this model does show me some of these vessels with nothing interfering with my view. But again, once you get very far away from the torso, I don't like Wireman too much. In fact, what I'll probably do is poll all the A&P instructors who are here in the lab with me today and decide how much we like Wireman or not. Hello, I would like to thank you all for coming, taking time out of your schedule to attend this meeting of all the A&P instructors present in the Bio 224 lab to determine the fate for online lab number 2 of the Wireman model. I know some instructors love this model, some instructors not so much. So I'm going to put a motion on the floor to you, my august colleagues. I move that we only use the Wireman for those blood vessels that I will explain to students in this video lab, staying away from the upper and lower limb vessels, focusing only on those vessels that are in the torso because of the lack of anatomical landmarks. So I would like to get an opinion, an expert opinion from each one of you in attendance as to the fate for lab number 2 of this model for this online semester. I will direct the voting. My motion is made. I move we only use Wireman for the torso and those vessels that I have shown students in the model. What say you? Sir, I feel to elevate one model above the others, or to lower the status of one model below the others, would simply not be logical. I abstain. This is not a Russian model. I do not like it. Captain, this model is poorly engineered. I do not see how we could use it. It doesn't have the power. Damn it, Dwayne. I'm a surgeon, not a model builder. I don't see how we could use this thing. I don't see how this group of students could use this model. I don't understand how the United Federation of Students could use this model in a two-dimensional space. And you have my order, mister. Well, if I've done my tabulation correctly, we have one abstention, 1, 2, 3, 4, and a little harsh with the last one because we're reaching consensus, not giving orders, sir. But that makes 5, counting myself, against 1 abstain. So the ruling has happened of all the A&P instructors present today for the Wireman model. I will restrict my use of the Wireman model to only those vessels I show you in the instructional part of this online lab. That means a few in the neck, upper thorax, the aorta, the ascending lumbars, azygos, hemiazygos, like that, not out in the upper and lower limb. Wouldn't really be fair in a two-dimensional space because there are no anatomical landmarks whatsoever out here. And I think somebody's getting a little goofy here in the lab, because what kind of super nerd has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Star Trek shirts and a Star Trek mask? I will admit, sometimes hard to help myself. A couple more sketches for you, but remember, you need to make these sketches for yourself. Don't just look at the ones that Dwayne makes and think, oh yes, they're so beautiful, they're great. No, they're not that beautiful, they're not that great. But the ones you make will be beautiful. The ones you make will be great. Here I am at the top of page 4 in your lab manual with some more arteries and veins of the torso. Arteries, veins. So of course, look at this one. And we've already seen a few of these, so stick with me. Here, I would have the ascending aorta right there before the arch. There's the aortic arch. Then all of this from here down to here would be the descending aorta. And the descending aorta is subdivided into 2 sections above and below the diaphragm. Thoracic aorta is above the diaphragm. Abdominal aorta is below the diaphragm. Abdominal aorta is below the diaphragm. They're both part of the descending aorta. A question people often ask is, how would I indicate this for, say, a lab quiz? Well, if I had just a dot right there and said name the blood vessel, the best answer would be abdominal aorta. If I had dots all along here, then the entire blood vessel is the descending aorta. And if I only had a dot up here on the thoracic aorta, then the best answer is thoracic aorta. So you have to look at the dot placement and select the best answer from those provided. But these aren't the only arteries that you need to know the names of in the torso. A couple others would be these little branches off the aorta that we find below the diaphragm going to our vertebrae. These are lumbar arteries, right and left, lumbar arteries. Here I have an artery that shoots up into the diaphragm, because the diaphragm is a sheet of skeletal muscle, has to get glucose, needs oxygen, has to get rid of CO2, etc. This blood vessel that shoots up into the diaphragm from below is the inferior phrenic artery. Phrenic making reference to diaphragm. Inferior phrenic artery. 2 more on this diagram. Here, shooting straight off the bottom of the abdominal aorta, is a blood vessel that actually rides on the surface of your sacrum. This is a median sacral artery. And then above the diaphragm, sorry everybody for my lack of art, these blood vessels coming off the aorta and shooting out this way toward us between the ribs, these blood vessels are the intercostal arteries. They're between blood vessels. On the left side, left intercostal arteries. On the right side, right intercostal arteries. Feel free to pause this and look at it, but drawing it yourself is hopefully what will help you out. Notice right next door, I made a picture of the veins in the torso that you're responsible to know from page 4 in your lab manual. But notice this. How can I stress this? I don't know. Let's see. This is a posterior view, a view from behind the model. This is the best way to see these blood vessels. We don't have a very large list here on page 4 for veins of the torso, but they can be rather tough to find, so make sure you draw these first. Just to orient you, I have included the diaphragm. I have also included the inferior vena cava here in this sort of turquoise color, so you can see it, the inferior vena cava. But you've only got 4 on this list. You have these intercostal veins called the posterior intercostal veins. Posterior intercostal veins. Now, as I look at this, remembering it's a posterior view, like so, these are rights, these are lefts. What I see shooting up on either side of my vena cava from behind, and I'll stress this when you see the models, are 2 blood vessels running vertically on the right side. I'm going to say that again. On the right side, from behind, I have this blood vessel that comes up and makes a U-turn. This is called the azygous vein. The azygous vein, without a partner. Azygous vein. It starts here at about the diaphragm and runs up and does a U-turn. Look for that in the model. On the left side, again, this is a posterior view. On the left side, I have this thing which is known as the hemiazygous vein. It's called the hemiazygous because it's only half as tall. It comes up and then shoots over to merge with the azygous vein. Azygous on the person's right side, the longer one. Hemiazygous on the person's left side, the shorter one. Below the diaphragm, these 2 blood vessels are called the ascending lumbar veins. Ascending lumbar vein, the right one and the left one in this rear view. Again, feel free to pause, but remember, posterior view is the best one for these particular torso veins. Okay, let's talk about some of these blood vessels of the torso, namely the arteries. You can see that this anatomical model is facing us. So this would be her left, this would be her right. You can see that pretty obviously. And let's look at what goes on here in the torso. Of course, I have that ascending aorta right here, aortic arch, but that's not what we want to see right now. Let's pop that heart right out, and we can see the aorta after its U-turn, this descending aorta right here. So if I had it indicated with multiple dots all the way down until this branching or bifurcation, this whole section is the descending aorta. A very nice diaphragm here, above the diaphragm, thoracic aorta, below the diaphragm, abdominal aorta. Pretty easy to make out, I think. I do not, however, on this model, see an artery under the diaphragm, so there's no inferior phrenic on this one. I can, however, see a bunch of lumbar arteries right here shooting off the aorta in the abdominal section. So I see lumbar arteries. Let me lower this a little bit and zoom in. So I can see very characteristic lumbar arteries right here, those red ones. No intercostal arteries on this model because I have these lungs in the way. But I do see a very nice median sacral artery running right across the top of that sacrum on the anterior surface. So a median sacral artery right here. The lumbars would be rights and lefts. The median sacral is just the median sacral. Let's look at some of these vessels in different models. Here's another model showing the same ascending aorta. Take this heart off. Thoracic part of the descending aorta, remember, above the diaphragm. Abdominal aorta here. Left lumbar arteries right there. Very nice. And here on this model's left side, I can see intercostal arteries and veins and nerves, for that matter, the yellow things. So in red, we have the intercostal arteries. On the right side, the right intercostal arteries. Let's look at a different model. Again, here I have the ascending aorta. Let's remove the heart. Thoracic aorta. I can see some very good intercostal arteries, the red ones. The abdominal aorta, right here, but this model doesn't show me any lumbar arteries, doesn't show me any median sacral, but this one does show me a very nice example of the inferior phrenic artery right here, coming off the aorta and serving the underside of this diaphragm. The inferior phrenic artery, right there. Now let's take a look at some of the veins. I would have to admit that probably the single best model we have for these torso veins is the much hated, at least by me, wire man. But the Wireman model does show me some of these veins that the other models do not. So I want you to first understand our orientation. We are behind this model. Notice the two kidneys here. Notice that I can see the aortic arch coming down all the way. The heart is not visible from this side except the back of the thing. So this is a posterior view. On the right side, coming up, making a U-turn, is the azygous vein. This light blue colored diaphragm, so above my finger, on the model's right-hand side is the azygous vein. Above the diaphragm on the model's left-hand side, which notice comes up and goes across right here to join with the azygous, is the hemiazygous vein. So above the diaphragm, azygous vein, hemiazygous vein, because it only goes up halfway. Below the diaphragm, notice where they're very narrow here, below the diaphragm we have the ascending lumbar veins. I'm going to say that again, a right and left ascending lumbar vein. Now I can't stress this enough. This is a posterior view. Azygous vein is on your right, hemiazygous vein is on your left. Ascending lumbars become those continuous tubes. Ascending lumbars down here low, hemiazygous, azygous veins up above. No good intercostals on this model, posterior intercostals, but then we have the limits of Wireman. So notice here in my 3/4 size model, I can see right here, this happens to be the azygous vein. It's on his right-hand side. I don't know if you noticed that or not. But the reason I show you this model is because I can see right here all these veins, which are intercostal veins or posterior intercostal veins. The posterior intercostal veins between the ribs. Lots of models show those. So any arteries between the ribs, intercostal arteries. Any veins between the ribs that you see in this view, posterior intercostal veins. Right ones on the right-hand side. One more vascular picture, and I know what you're saying. You're saying, Dwayne, it's like an addiction. And it is. And I don't want to recover because I love to draw them before I look at them on the models, but I'm not going to do everything for you. Lower torso and leg, that's on you. And again, I know what you're going to say, Dwayne, wait to go to rehab for this addiction until after you do the leg and the lower torso picture. No, I'm not going to do everything for you, and I'm certainly not going to do everything for you in every lab throughout the semester. I'm trying to show you a methodology here. So make your own picture first, then watch me take you through the models. Or maybe the other way around, but I definitely recommend the picture first. So here I'm on page 4, the bottom half, the vessels of the upper limb, aka your arm. But since this is anatomy, we know this is your arm and this is your forearm, correct? So what you can see is my crude heart, ascending aorta, aortic arch, descending aorta, left subclavian artery, left common carotid right here, Left subclavian artery, right there. So we're going to follow this arterial blood supply to the hand. So this blood vessel is going to continue down through the arm, shoulder, arm, like this, about like that, while it's under your clavicle. So the clavicle, the actual bone, would be sitting right here. It's called the subclavian artery. So about right here. From here to here, subclavian artery. Then it goes in to my shoulder, under the deltoid here. This would be the axillary artery. It's in my axillary region. So this would be the left axillary artery. It's the same tube. I want you to understand that. Think of the way some roads are named in a city. This, just last week, this actually happened. Traveling down Centennial, I never turned, all of a sudden it became Camino El Dorado. Then it became Camino al Norte, and then it becomes Martin Luther King Boulevard. Same road in the north side of town. Some of you from the west side, you understand about the Durango Rampart Fort Apache thing. Same thing with blood vessels. They're named for where they live. This axillary artery has 3 big branches that come off of it, only one of which you need to know, and that's the subscapular artery. The subscapular artery. But when you see these offshoots, that's the axillary artery. I think it'll be more clear on my vascular arm model. Then when I get into the arm, we have the brachial artery. Left. And right at your elbow, this thing bifurcates. It splits into 2. Now, I am so poor at drawing hands that I had to indicate with a T which one is the thumb and which one is the pinky. So, digit 1, the thumb, digit 5, the pinky. On the thumb side, we have what? What bone lives here? The radius. So this is the left radial artery. Across from it, we have the left ulnar artery. Thumb and pinky, left radial, left ulnar. This radial artery you commonly take the pulse of. Use your fingers for the pulse, not your thumb. The thumb has its own pulse, not a big one, but it does. As we continue down the upper limb, we see these 2 blood vessels come back together forming 2 what are called arterial arches. This would be an example of an anastomosis where 2 blood vessels come together right here, the radial artery and ulnar artery remerging. These 2 things are called your palmar arches. And we have a deep palmar arch. That is the proximal one, and it's the left one. And we have a superficial palmar arch. That's the distal one, also left. Deep palmar arch, superficial palmar arch. And then shooting into my digits, I have the digital arteries. Left digital arteries. Right there. Blood vessels, arteries anyway, of the upper limb. Now let's take a look at what you have to know for veins for the upper limb. And I'm going to go ahead and superimpose those right over this. What do you suppose those blue ones are called? Left digital veins. Certainly. Are there any digital venous arches? Yeah, but you don't have to know the name of those. If it's not in the list, I can't ask it on the quiz. So we have to stick with what's on the list. So let's work our way back. What do you suppose runs right here and right there on the thumb and pinky side, respectively? Oftentimes existing as two smaller blood vessels, not one larger. Radial and ulnar what? Veins. Left radial vein, left ulnar vein. And we will see them coming together forming first brachial veins. Usually there's two, and then they sort of merge into one. Axillary vein, subclavian vein, like that. Left radial vein, left ulnar vein or veins, left brachial veins, left axillary vein, left subclavian vein, and of course the left digitals down here. I think you get the idea. These would be carrying the blood back. But a thing you've probably noticed about veins, we seem to have a lot of them near the surface of our skin. And you have a couple superficial veins in the arm that you have to know the names of. One great big one, I'm going to use a slightly different blue color here. One big one that runs all the way up along the thumb side. That's the cephalic vein. It would be a left cephalic vein on the thumb side. On the pinky side, running all the way up, is the basilic vein. This would be a left because it's the left arm. Very superficial veins. Then going across right at the elbow is the median cubital vein, left because this is a left arm. The median cubital vein. Now, this looks like a mess right now. I'm aware of that. I suggest you draw one arterial picture, one venous picture, then consult the instructional part of the lab where I take you through the vascular arms. Cephalic vein on the thumb side, basilic vein on the pinky side, median cubital connecting them. It's that median cubital vein that people back in the day used to like to look for to start IVs in. You've seen in television shows where, they're doing this thing. Don't do that. That's not going to help you see the vein. That's not going to do anything. You can palpate it if you want to. I don't get this smacking thing. I don't know what you're doing that for, because it doesn't do anything. But make a vascular picture first, then look at the models. The model you're looking at here is what I like to call the Forbes vasoskeletal model. Forbes because it was constructed by one of our very fabulous lab instructors, Dr. Sheila Forbes, using a skeleton and blood vessels. Vasoskeletal Forbes model. I would challenge you to find a better one for the arms and the legs, and I know you can't find a better one for the upper and lower limbs that's more relatable to your lab this semester. Notice that we have a skeleton here, arteries on the left or right side as he faces you, and veins on the left side as it faces you. So let's take a look at this upper limb vasculature, these upper limb vessels on this Forbes vasoskeletal model. So notice here the artery under the clavicle, the right subclavian artery. In the area of the armpit, it is the axillary artery right here. Now, how do I know where it's the axillary artery? I'm going to rotate this model a little bit for you. Do you see this branch coming off right here? Where the major branches come off, that's the axillary artery. So I know this is axillary right here because there's a branch coming off of it, a fairly big one, that runs back under the scapula. This is the right subscapular artery, which actually serves that subscapularis muscle living in the subscapular fossa, just to irritate you with a little first semester stuff. This is axillary. This is subclavian. Now, I know what you're asking. You're saying, Dwayne, what about if you try to be a smart aleck and put a dot, say, right here somewhere in between where maybe I can't tell? Nobody tries to do that. There are enough blood vessels here. It's hard enough without us making an effort to try to mess you up. So again, when you see this branch coming off, that's right about in the middle of the axillary region of this artery. Once we're below this, in front of the humerus here, it's the brachial artery. So this is the right brachial artery. Notice it branches. I need to know which side is the thumb side and which side is the pinky side. So let me zoom in a little bit for you. We'll see how old Professor Allner's video skills are. So this is very obviously the thumb. And if that didn't tell you, you probably recognize the radius bone right there. So this is the right radial artery, right ulnar artery. Remember our two arches, the deep and superficial palmar arch and the digital arteries. So one more time, digital arteries, right ones. the right superficial palmar arch, right deep palmar arch, right radial artery, right ulnar artery, brachial artery, the right one, let me rotate the model so you can see, right axillary artery between my fingers, right subclavian artery, and let's move quickly to the venous side, which is all left on this model. Left subclavian vein, right there. Left axillary vein, right there. Now, look at these that I have right here, sweeping all the way down this arm. I have this one and this one, which are very superficial veins, but I can't tell which is which until I see the hand. I need to know what? Where the thumb is. Once I can identify the thumb on this model, I know that this entire blood vessel is the what, everyone? Cephalic vein. Left cephalic vein on the thumb side. This one is the left basilic vein, and this one that shoots across the elbow from one to the other, the left median cubital vein. The left median cubital vein. I can also see on this model, somebody crammed it around on me a little bit, a brachial vein which diverges into an ulnar and radial vein. Let me grab another model, maybe you can see it a little more clearly. Okay, this is just another Forbes model. So again, I can see subclavian vein, axillary vein, all the way down the thumb side, which this is. I don't know if you can tell, see the thumb there. The cephalic vein, basilic vein, connected by median cubital. This one back here under my thumb is the brachial vein, ulnar here, radial there. Let's try a model that many students find to be more confusing, but I hope it'll make sense to you. Maybe you'll see in looking at this model why some people prefer the Forbes vasoskeletal model, and I can understand that, but what we have to do is keep in mind only those things from our lab manual are fair game on this particular model, even though many vessels, especially a lot of superficial veins, are shown here. So let's take a look at this one, arteries first, and see if we can follow these vessels along. Now, what I'm going to do is just remove some of these superficial veins out of the way to give you perhaps a better view. So notice right up here, I have a small section of the axillary artery. I know this is axillary right here between my thumb and forefinger because I see a couple branches coming off of it. No subscapular branch on this one. These are actually the humeral, for the bone, circumflex arteries, which are not not part of your lab. But this signifies to me that this is still axillary artery. So axillary artery, then we get below here, this is the brachial artery. Notice it diverges, it bifurcates, it branches. On the thumb side, radial artery. On the pinky side, ulnar artery. But hang on. Is this a right or a left arm? Look at the thumb. Do you see the palmar arches here? That makes this the palm. This is facing you. This is a left arm. This is a left arm. You have to determine right or left before you start naming things. Left axillary artery, left brachial artery, left radial artery, left ulnar artery. Look close at the palmar arches. You can probably see both here. Left deep palmar arch, left superficial palmar arch, and you can see a couple of venous ones here, but you don't have to know their names. In red, the digital arteries. Here, left digital arteries, left digital veins, the blue ones. Notice right next to the radial artery, I have radial veins, actually paired. This is very common, paired. So left radial vein, left ulnar vein. Keep following. See the left brachial veins, two. There's actually two of them. Brachial veins. Keep going up. And they go up, and they go up, and they all start to converge into that axillary vein. Now let's look at the superficial veins that we have here. Three of them to know the name of. Notice this one that runs all the way down on the thumb side, cephalic vein, left cephalic vein. This one that runs all the way down on the pinky side, left basilic vein, and the one that goes across to connect the two, the left median cubital vein. Remember, the same rule applies. Any model that I show you blood vessels on here in the instructional part of the lab or in the practice section of the lab, fair game for a practical or quiz. So before we go on into this torso for a few blood vessels, make sure that you join me on page 5 so we can look at the blood vessels of the lower limb. Now, I might say lower torso and leg, or lower torso and lower limb if it was me, because we need to start with a torso like this one, or one of the others, to see the first few of these arteries and veins. So notice, of course, our model is facing us. And let's look down low at some of these branches that we see coming off of the aorta and going into the inferior vena cava. So, of course, you probably noticed that we have the abdominal aorta right here and the inferior vena cava right there. The arteries are more easily visible because they're anterior. You can see these. Hopefully, somebody we know and love, that means you, has taken time to draw pictures of the lower limb. It will make your life a lot easier. If you have not, I would suggest that you pause me now and go ahead and make a couple pictures, or at the very least do it afterward, because it does make your life a lot easier. So just by way of quick review, part of the descending aorta, the abdominal aorta right here, I can see some lumbar arteries right there on the left side. And then I can see that the aorta branches here and here. These two vessels, now just these short parts between my fingers right here, this is the common iliac artery. This is the left one. The left common iliac artery. That makes this the right common iliac artery. I can see my median sacral right there, just for fun. And much like the carotids, these are called common iliac arteries because very quickly they branch again. So the left common iliac artery, then we have the left external and internal iliac arteries. Left common iliac artery, left external iliac artery, left internal iliac artery. And I have exactly the same setup with the veins and the arteries on the other side. Abdominal aorta, right common iliac artery, right internal iliac artery, right external iliac artery. This would be the right external iliac vein. You can see it cut here. I'll show you other models. The internal iliac vein and the common iliac vein very short. The veins are a little tougher to see on this particular model. But before we leave it, I want you to understand that these two external iliac vessels I see here, artery and vein, become your femoral artery and vein once they leave abdominalville and enter leg town. So we have that same sort of idea of blood vessels changing names based on where they are located. So let's look at a few other models for this same series of blood vessels. Right here, just because I sort of like this left view a little better, see again the abdominal aorta, left common iliac artery, left external iliac artery, left internal iliac artery. And here I can see the same idea with the veins. Left common iliac vein. Let me rotate the model just slightly. Left internal iliac vein. Left external iliac vein. And once the road travels out of the body cavity, we have the femoral artery and vein right there. Here again, totally nice view from an anterior position. Abdominal aorta, right and left common iliac arteries, right and left common iliac veins. Very nice branching here. Left internal iliac, external iliac, and I can even see the femoral out here. Right side, external iliac artery, internal iliac artery, right internal iliac vein, right external iliac vein. Still here in the torso. Now we are looking once again at the Forbes vasoskeletal model. Looking at the pelvis, to orient us, notice the pubic bone, pubic symphysis. So that makes this the right side, this the left side, or for this particular model, red is right, arteries, blue is left, the veins. So let's take a look at the arterial side for just a moment. And notice we did not build in an aorta, so we start with the common iliac artery, common iliac vein. Right common iliac artery, left common iliac vein. Then I see the branching, the right internal and external iliacs. Over here, let me rotate just a little bit. Left internal iliac vein, external iliac vein. Once we're crossing over the pubic bone and entering the leg, now we become the femoral artery and vein. This femoral artery is one of the places you can get a good pulse on a person if you know where to look for it, along with the radial artery, the superficial temporal, the common carotid, some of the ones we've seen in this lab already. But let's continue to follow this arterial system down. Notice what the femoral artery does. It goes behind the femur. It goes behind your femur, not in front of. You don't have this major artery in front of your knee. It's in the back of your knee. So watch me rotate this Forbes model so we can get a better view. This femoral artery comes back here behind your knee, posterior femur, posterior tibia, and right here behind the knee, it is now called the popliteal artery. This would be the right popliteal artery because the model is facing away from us. This is the right side. And remember, on this Forbes model, red is the right side. So this is the popliteal artery right here. This is another place where you can get a pulse. Now maybe these old fingers of mine just aren't very sensitive, but I can never get a good popliteal pulse off of myself or anybody else. Femoral, radial, axillary, brachial, superficial temporal, common carotid, those are all great. This one, I just can't really seem to get that one. So those of you going into some of the health professions, work on that one and then maybe you can come back and teach me how to do it. But this is the popliteal artery. So again, it's the same thing as the femoral artery. It's just when it's behind the knee, it's called popliteal. And it continues downward, follow my finger everyone, to become the posterior tibial artery. Femoral, popliteal, posterior tibial right here, they're all the same tube. It's just where is it? Now, I like to use these two branches as landmarks for me. Up here it's popliteal, down here it's posterior tibial. These two branches that you always see coming off the inferior end of the popliteal where it's becoming posterior tibial, the first branch shoots right between my bones into that anterior compartment, everyone. Think shin splints here for you muscular people. This is the anterior tibial artery. And, let me spin it around again, notice this one comes off first. The anterior tibial artery branches off that popliteal and then runs down the front of the tibia. The lower branch from the popliteal artery is the fibular artery, sometimes called the common peroneal artery. Notice how this one shoots out laterally to the fibula. So anterior tibial shoots forward and goes down first, fibular artery second, all on the right side for this particular model. Down in the foot, it's pretty easy. This large straight vessel, the dorsal pedis artery, or dorsalis pedis artery, sometimes called. This is another pulse location. That one you can usually find on somebody. Got some arches here, who cares? They're not on your list. But we have digital arteries. So right digital arteries, right dorsal pedis artery, right anterior tibial artery, right fibular artery, right posterior tibial artery, right popliteal artery, and right femoral artery. The veins are very similar. Starting up here at the pelvis, we have the femoral vein. Follow down. Notice it too dives behind the femur. Popliteal vein which becomes the posterior tibial vein. And just like the arteries, notice two branches here. Notice two branches. The first one going forward to become the anterior tibial vein. The second one becoming the fibular vein, right there. Identical vascular-wise, the two limbs in this regard. Now remember, these would be veins. They're all on the left side of this model, and they would all be carrying blood upward through the limb. The arteries, of course, carrying blood downward. Now, if you consult page 5, you will also notice digital veins of the foot. There they are. And a couple large superficial veins that we have, both of which are visible right here. This one, great big thing. Notice how it runs pretty much all the way down the leg. This is called the great saphenous vein. So on this model, this would be the left great saphenous vein. This one, right here, sort of the mirror image, but only half as big. Notice this one runs down the outside of the leg, but only from the knee to the ankle. This is the small saphenous vein. Great saphenous vein, left great saphenous vein, left small saphenous vein. If you're at home watching this online lesson and you happen to be wearing a pair of pants, I want you to look at your pants right now. The seam that runs down the middle of your leg on the big toe side, they call that the inseam of pants. That's where the great saphenous vein is. The outseam of your pants between your knee and your ankle is the small saphenous vein. If you're at home watching this online lesson and you are not wearing pants, I don't want to hear about it. But if you are, the inseam is the great saphenous, the outseam is the small saphenous vein. Now let's look at another vascular model. This vascular leg that we're looking at right now is really very nice, but many students don't like it because it simply shows too much. Too many vessels. Now remember, you don't have to know every single blood vessel, you just have to know the ones from the list in your lab manual. So let's start with this one right here that dips behind my femur. Notice the head of the femur here. Notice the kneecap there. This is a right leg. So this red one is the right femoral artery, the right femoral vein. And notice they both dip behind the femur. Let me rotate it. To become what? The popliteal artery and vein. The right popliteal vein in blue, right popliteal artery in red. Then we start to see branches. The first branch that comes off, the red one here, blue one here, rotate it again, go to the front to become the what? Anterior tibial artery and vein. The right anterior tibial artery, right anterior tibial vein. Continue down the leg or foot. I can see quite clearly the dorsal pedis artery right here to take the pulse, and digital arteries and veins, all right ones. If I flip it around again, the second branching for each of these, here for the artery and here for the vein, become the fibular artery and vein. Right fibular artery, right fibular vein. Here we have the posterior tibial artery and vein. So the big bone, the tibia, has the posterior tibials next to it. The fibula has the fibulars next to it. And the big superficial veins, all the way down, follow my fingers, all the way down the big toe side, we have the great saphenous vein, the inseam of your pants. And on the outside, from the knee to the ankle, what's this one? The small saphenous vein. Again, all rights because this is a right leg. Watch me go through these vessels several times before you do the practice section.